All right, hey everyone. This is our Intro to Ruby workshop. Wasn't sure how many slides to put on this initial thing. I just wanted to make sure that we all the fundamental understanding of what Ruby is on the slideshow mode. So our agenda tonight is, go over what is Ruby, make sure everyone has Ruby installed, go over some of the basic concepts of the language, your data types, variables, operators, classes, and then from there, we'll link to a basic Ruby application that I'll walk through building up tonight. So Ruby is an object-oriented language. It was started in Japan in 1996 by this guy, I try to pronounce his full name, but we call him Mats. And when he created this, his objectives for the language were high productivity and simplicity, and kind of wanted a beautiful language to work with, and so that's what he made. Ruby is a dynamically typed language. There's no, it's not static type. You don't define what your variables are. You just create them, set them, you can pass things along. So it's very simple to work with in that regard. There's also no compiler. Code is interpreted as it's run, and we have a virtual machine that it gets run in. The default one is written in C, but there are other interpreters out there as well. Ruby can be installed on most operating systems, but Mac and Linux are recommended. In my experience, this is due to dependencies that are written with Mac and Linux in mind. But if anyone has experience, running Ruby successfully on Windows, I'd like to hear about that, because most people I talk to, they just almost always run it on Mac. So there are different version managers out there. You'll often hear about RVM and RVN. A lot of folks I know these days use ASDF for everything. So especially if you're doing Ruby and JavaScript and Python and whatever else, ASDF is very popular. And then you go to rubylang.org, they have a page for installation. So if you need that, you can get, you can probably just type over rubylang.org and you'll find that installation page. So for data types, most of these will be familiar coming from other languages: integers, floats, booleans, arrays, strings. The ones that are more Ruby specific are going to be your hashes, which is a key value thing. So you might refer to it as a map or an object in other languages. And then symbols are similar to strings, but instead of, the best way to describe this, symbols, they have they start with a colon at the beginning of them, and they are static, they're immutable. So if you look at the object ID of it, it will always be the same, versus a string. It can be mutated, you can add characters to it. Once you define a symbol, its place is locked in memory and it cannot be changed. So we often use these with hashes to as our keys, and we use them for other things too, but it's just a similar alternative to a string. Let's see, as mentioned, Ruby is dynamically typed, so you can create a variable and you also read and clear that variable. So put an example there of assigning a variable x to an integer, a string, and a boolean. That all is valid. You don't have to define the type ahead of time. Variable names must begin with an alphabetic character, so you don't make them start with numbers. And then a convention that I've seen in most projects is to use snake case for variable names. So if you're coming from camel case, Ruby is more snake case. basic operators. You have your less than, greater than, equal, not equal, and or not comparators. Math, you have your plus, minus, multiply, subtract, exponential, and modulo. Assignment, you can do equals, plus equals, minus equals, and or equals. I'm not sure if I've seen or equals outside of Ruby, but with or equals, you'll give a variable, it will look for the value of that variable, and if it already has a truthy value, it will use that instead of what's on the right-hand side of it. So we use this to check if something's already been assigned before reassigning it, and then your ternaries, which is mostly used for conditional. So you have a condition on the left-hand side. If it's evaluated as true, the thing after the question mark will be returned. Otherwise, the thing after the colon will be returned.
Is there a concept of like a triple equals for truthiness in Ruby, or is that?
I haven't seen that outside of JavaScript. I know what you're talking about though. Yeah, I'm gonna say no.
Okay. Usually you just run it yourself to do something specific.
Okay.
So we have methods, which are synonymous with functions. You can make method definitions with or without parameters. If your method doesn't take any arguments, then you don't have to make the parentheses. Same thing when you call it. And then methods also implicitly return the last value of the statement. And I think I have an example here. Yep, I have two methods. First one doesn't take any arguments, just prints hello world. And you see there's no parentheses, so you only need the parentheses if you're going to give it arguments. And then the second function here, second method, takes one argument, and then the last line, we are returning, but we don't have to call return. There is a return keyword, but unless we're trying to do an early return, we'll just write it like this, or the last line is what's returning.
What's the question mark?
That's a great question. So it's common practice in Ruby. If the return result is Boolean, we write it in the form of a question. So in this case, we're asking if the string we're giving it is a palindrome. So it's going to return true or false. So we put a question mark at the end of it.
It's just an indicator to say this is going to return true or false and not some other value. It's not, the interpreter doesn't change anything. Kind of turn that way. You could have a method that returns a Boolean and not have it. You can have that method not return a Boolean. It's just convention.
Okay.
Then we have classes, which Ruby is an object-oriented language, so classes are the core construct of the language. We create classes to define the methods and the state that we're going to be working with. We'll often use them to model the real-world entities that we're working with, users, money, cars, etc. And then let's see, actual data contained in a class instance. Right, so we create an instance of a class, and then we assign state to that instance. When we're constructing an instance of the class, we can pass arguments into that. That will go through a constructor, and we can optionally use that to assign to the instance. And then everything in Ruby is some form of object, so you can pretty much on everything you can call .class on it. It'll tell you what is this an instance of. So even like basic data items, so integers, strings, symbols, you can do .class and it'll tell you basically what it is, but also indicating that's what class it's from. example of a user class. Initialize is our constructor. So in this case, it takes a first name and a last name, and then there's a method there for concatenating that into a full name. What I meant to put here is an example of how to actually initialize it, but it's just user.new, and then new is where you'll pass in your arguments for the initializer. That's it for now. I mean, are there any questions that you want to get into before we start looking at code? All right.
What's the experience level so far between you two? How much experience have you?
0.
0, okay.
Cool.
So the experience I have is mainly having to edit like pod files, Cocoa pods, and CI, CD scripts, which is what is it called? I'll look it up again, but yeah, it's a CI/CD system I used to use for mobile. It's all written in Ruby, but the thing that I was told is that they were using some of the functionality of the language where you can actually kind of define your own syntax. And so it was based off of Ruby, but they kind of were doing like their own syntax. And they said that one of the reasons why they used Ruby is because it allowed them to do that. And so I don't know if that's ringing a bell.
Yeah, so they wrote their own DSL, so maybe they're just using their methods versus straight Ruby.
Okay.
Sounds bad.
Makes sense. I'll stop recording for now. Then if we get into something